Well, the fatal shooting of teenager Trayvon Martin made national headlines a couple of months ago, and the national media turned it into a story about racial profiling and a vigilante killing a black teenager just for walking around his neighborhood. The defendant, George Zimmerman, claimed he shot Trayvon in self-defense. Evidence finally released this week by the prosecutor's office shows Zimmerman suffered 2 black eyes, a broken nose, and cuts to the back of the head. Injuries that could have been caused during a struggle. Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz says the prosecutors have bungled the case. I spoke to him earlier. Great to have you here. There was some shocking evidence that came forward this week that was released, not only about the medical condition of George Zimmerman, which was not included in the prosecutor's affidavit, but also indication close-range gunshot wound to Trayvon Martin and no other signs of injury other than bloody knuckles indicating that they might have been used to create the broken nose on George Zimmerman. What is most shocking about the new evidence and the fact that we haven't heard it before?
What's most shocking is that the prosecutor was aware of most of the evidence in general outline, and she made a deliberate, willful, unethical, unprofessional, and illegal decision to withhold that evidence, not from you and me in the media, but from the courts and from the affidavit that she filed in support of an overblown second-degree murder prosecution.
You mentioned illegal. That's a strong word.
It is.
Your allegation is that because she knowingly, willingly, deliberately withheld critical evidence that would affect the outcome, not only of public opinion. This is not about what the public thinks. This is about the guilt or innocence of a man accused in a court of law. So that takes it to a different level, does it not? It
does, and she may have done even worse than that. The information suggests that she actually may have withheld some of this information from the police officer whose affidavits she submitted. In other words, she may have laundered the information in a way to permit that police officer to file an affidavit that didn't include this material, and then she could say, you know, sitting there like the, I don't see anything, I don't know anything, he didn't know about that. But the prosecutor's office was fully aware of much of this information when they filed that affidavit. And then you mentioned in your intro that the media talked about profiling. It was the prosecutor who talked about profiling. In the affidavit itself, he uses the term that Zimmerman was profiling Martin. And when he was asked about it, what was the basis? He didn't have any basis. It was just made up.
And that's a very subjective point of view, to get inside the mind of George Zimmerman, unless he has maybe blogged or written or somehow spoken on the record comments that indicated that he was racist, comments that indicated that he distrusted people of color. There is no indication. I think it's his either grandfather, great-grandfather who was African-American, his father was Hispanic. I sometimes get a little confused even when people use the term white Hispanic, which we even said in the intro. I'm not sure what that means. The point is, you can't just allege racism, can you, in legal filings unless there is some evidence to indicate that?
No, and certainly when you're filing an affidavit, it has to be based on the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if you deliberately submit a half-truth, that's a lie. And this affidavit and the submissions by the prosecutor constituted a half-truth. That is a lie, and she ought to be investigated for what she's done. She's also done something much worse. She sees her job, essentially, is to prevent riots. She said, essentially, reading between the lines, I'm not interested in justice for Zimmerman. Her job is to do justice for Trayvon Martin, and that's obviously not the prosecutor's job. But she's raised expectations. She's indicted or informed for second-degree murder. There was never any basis for second-degree murder. That raises expectations. No reasonable jury, we can get to the jury in a minute because it's going to be very hard to get a jury that isn't afraid for its own life if it acquits. But no reasonable jury will convict on the basis of this evidence for second-degree murder. Expectations will be raised and then lowered. And if there are, God forbid, any riots or demonstrations, the finger of responsibility will point directly at this prosecutor.
I almost can't imagine there not being some type of very violent reaction, given that there was a pretty violent, I guess, prelude even before charges were filed. People were absolutely demanding that someone get arrested, that someone get charged, that someone go to jail for this. Now, if Zimmerman ends up getting acquitted, or even perhaps more, maybe interestingly, the charge is dropped, this could make the Rodney King aftermath look tame.
Well, you know, you can understand why there'd be reaction, because the public wasn't aware of the facts. Take, for example, he wasn't arrested. He was arrested. He was handcuffed. He was involuntarily put in a police van, taken to police headquarters. I teach criminal law. That is an arrest. He was arrested. He was then released when the prosecution couldn't make out a case. In fact, one of the officers recommended a prosecution, though not for murder, for manslaughter. It never occurred to anybody to charge for murder until this politically motivated prosecutor, who has a terrible reputation for overcharging, came in and said, might as well charge for second-degree murder. I'll be a hero. By the time the case gets resolved years from now, people will forget about that, and she eliminates responsibility. You know, the Justice Department has a slogan on its front door. It says, the government wins whenever justice prevails. That's the job of the prosecutor, and she has not been doing her job.
It's always a pleasure to visit with you, and thanks for your candor.